Welcome to Breaking Badness, Jason. How are
Thank you
you?
so much. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Doing very well. I'm so glad you could join us as well as perennial guest, CISO Daniel Schwalbe. Thanks for coming, Daniel.
My pleasure.
For our listeners, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing security for about 20 years. Most of my experience has been offensive security. So started out as a pen tester doing offensive security tests, mostly web assessments and network assessments, like a lot of people do in the industry. When I was coming up, pen tester was one of those coveted jobs you wanted to get to do kind of assessments and stuff. But I've had kind of a crazy career path. I went from offensive security to transitioning into leadership, but never stopped hacking along the way. So I do a lot of bug bounty work. So I started off a small consultancy, then went to HP, which was a bigger company, to do contracting and pen testing for other Fortune 100 and 200 customers. Left there to work at a company called BugCrowd, which does bug bounty work, and still continue to hack with them on the side. It's just never left my blood. And then transitioned at BugCrowd into leadership roles at a startup, and then left there because I'm a giant nerd, as you can see. And I went into the video game industry. So I was the CISO for Ubisoft, which is they make games like Assassin's Creed, Just Dance, The Division, Rainbow Six, all those. And so I was the CISO there for 3.5, almost 4 years. And then left there to start my own company, basically, going back to being a practitioner. So red teaming, pen testing, and training as well. I have a real big passion for training. So I've done a little bit of everything: red, blue, purple leadership. And so I feel like I'm like a master of nothing. I've had a lot of exposure to everything.
The gaming industry being as high profile as it is, and also dealing with its fair amount of issues at times, I can only imagine defending a big game company like that and a very interesting task.
It's really interesting because I didn't realize before I got into the gaming industry how big of a target they are. You want to talk about threat actors and what they're and who they're targeting, especially younger threat actors. It's crazy. Being at a video game company, you have your nation states trying to break into you because you're a successful business and you have like, profit and revenue, and they're trying to steal money from you, extort you, or ransomware. You have all those and all the problems of being a big corporate business with security. But then you also have these young kids who all they want to do is hack your games, hack your company for the clout. And so you deal with it felt like double the threat actors that we were dealing with all the time at that job. Yeah.
Definitely a scaling thing. Yeah, the advanced threat actors, there's a finite number of them, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have angry kids who are feel they got slighted or they don't like the latest game update or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they'll attack the game. They'll try to cheat the game, or they'll actually attack the company too to try to get at the game companies and the employees. So there's a fair amount of privacy that needs to happen too in a big organization like that. 25 to 40 gaming companies, which you can consider triple A or just a little bit below triple A. And if you work at one of those companies, there's a fair amount you have to do to protect yourself as well. I think I've heard some horror stories about people being mailed some stuff that was just really inappropriate because they were involved with being attached to a gaming brand or something like that. So it's nuts.
Gosh, the gaming world is crazier than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. People are passionate about it. I think I read somewhere really recently that gaming has now overtaken almost every other secondary kind of hobby in America, at least. People are either on their phones gaming, or they're on their consoles, or they're on their other PCs or whatever. But it's like the biggest secondary pastime, or it's the biggest time sink that you have outside of work for most people in America.
Are you a gamer, Jason?
I am, yes, yeah. So luckily for me, I think that gaming saved me from a misspent youth, I think. And I met a lot of really good community gaming. So that was why I went to Ubisoft and in that phase of my career. Also, just to see if I could do the big CISO role. There are different types of CISO roles, right? There are startup CISO roles, there are field CISO roles, and there are big company CISO roles, which means that you're managing like a multinational security program over several continents, usually upwards of 10,000 employees or something like that. And so I wanted to see if I could do it. The answer was I could do it, but I didn't really like it a ton. So I left and, and got out. Now I CISO at a smaller level and do consulting. So that's nice.
I was going to ask you about the difference between being a CISO at a larger company versus a startup and what your experience was at both. It sounds like you prefer the smaller setting, or what? Can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the challenges in having a security program that's both adopted and enforced, it's much easier from a cultural level at a smaller company usually, because there's just less people to win the hearts and minds of, right? When you go to a big company, no matter what kind of company it is, especially if you're dealing with a multinational company. There are business units that are very entrenched in the way they do things. It's really hard to change that coming in as a security leader. And I'm always not trying to come in and change everything, right? I think that the job of a security leader is to meet the business where it is and try to add as much security as possible to keep them secure. But there are always table stakes things that you need to do as a security program. And multinational company, you have things like multinational politics. You have business units which run pretty much on their own. You have a really hard time changing the culture of a big company with 22,000 employees or something like that. And those parts of the job, they take a special person to do those types of things. I think that was one of the things. I think that gaming companies in specific, and then some tech companies too, they have special challenges. So if you think of a gaming company, it's extensively a company, a publisher usually, or a big gaming company, if they get to AAA status, they are gobbling up smaller game companies, which are sometimes outfits that are running out of their garage, right? They built a cool game at one point, get acquired. And so their tech stack is completely different than the corporate tech stack that builds most games. And so what you have after years of doing that is you have this business, which is one entity, but then it actually feels like 40 different smaller businesses inside of it with their own development teams, with their own tech stacks. And that's really hard to come together and standardize and secure. And so that was also a challenge that I think anybody in gaming or some certain types of tech or even finance, like multinational finance, might face something like that, or banking. So those CISOs, usually what you do is you actually create regional CISOs, like BISOs, basically business CISOs, and you try to tackle the problem in your domain. But that takes a lot of budget. Usually finance is the only vertical that can afford to hire multiple CISOs to deal with that issue. And so a lot of companies just have one person trying to tackle it, and it's really difficult.
It's very familiar what you've been recounting. This is my third CISO level role, and it's definitely a challenge at most levels. We're about 150 people, but we're also our security company. So that's a whole nother kettle of
It
fish,
is.
because a lot of people working here have security backgrounds. So they're like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm like, yes, you do, except we're going to do it a little bit differently now.
Yeah. No, that's also a hard one. Yeah. Security companies have been at, there's a lot of very entrenched ideas, I would say. So yeah. 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 You said we were talking earlier before the show, you have a kind of similar background. Did you come up via like testing and stuff like that too?
I came up through frontline security operations.
Okay.
So I
Cool.
was in the trenches for several years at a very large research organization.
Cool.
So we had about 500,000 devices on a network and no
Nice.
firewalls, public IPs to every endpoint. Have at it. Good
Yeah.
luck. It was
Yeah.
definitely a trial by fire, but I still to this day benefit from that experience. And then
Yeah.
stuck in that environment for 15-ish years,
Okay.
just working my way up. And yeah, definitely that experience is very hard to come by these days. And I think today that makes me a better security leader because I've done the frontline trenches job all the way through like middle management and now as a senior leader. So I think as an industry, we have a bit of a problem of, okay, we need more people,
Mhm.
minimum of 2 years of experience required to apply. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where are you going to get that experience?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things I talk a lot about when I do leadership talks or any type of content is that it's really hard to build a security program either from scratch or augment one that's broken at any company without having either been at that company's frontline or a frontline somewhere. Right. And for a long time in the security industry, we had a lot of finance people or other executives who are transitioning into CISO roles or security leadership roles, whatever the highest ranking security leadership role, it could be a director or a VP or something like that, but really not having any experience with security. And so trying to lead teams. And so it's been one of my biggest kind of things talking about. You have to have someone who has been on the front line, who has used some of the technologies, who knows at least what your company's important things are, because every company is a different landscape, has a different attack surface. It's actually these days, I think, growing your own highest level security ranking leadership person it's almost better these days, I think, than just promoting someone who doesn't know anything about security or finding someone who's worked in a similar industry or something like that. I think that it's not that can't be done, but it's just, I feel like it's a little bit better to have that person who's seen the fight and understands the sitting in the chair and what it requires and stuff like that.
Both of you being here, what were your thoughts on ascending into more leadership positions coming from more of a practitioner background? Did you feel like that's something that you wanted to do, or did you feel like in order to advance in your career, that was the direction that you had to go? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. That's actually a great question because usually I get asked that question, but it's, oh, like, how did you do it? But not why did you do it? Was it forced on you or whatever? And that actually does happen a lot, right? And so you hit somewhat of a ceiling with being able to affect change, or sometimes it's monetary for like salary or something like that. And the next role is a leadership role. I feel like this is like a broken cycle in security, and I'm sure it is in tech too, but I just know it from security. You have amazing practitioners, like amazing team leads, and even sometimes just managers, but they're still doing a technical job. And that's what they get promoted for. And it's why they get promoted to those places. And then they need to advance in their career. And the only spot to move up to is like a more leadership position where they basically shed the responsibilities, which made them a great asset in the first place. And so I definitely had that. At HP, I started off as a lead tester, and then I ended up as director of penetration testing at HP. And I thought it was going to be more tech than it was, and ended up being more leadership than anything else. And so I learned how to be a leader from some really great mentors. I think that my superpower has always been being able to communicate to normal people about security stuff, being able to present really well, being able to compromise when needed, being an ally to get in the middle and talk between development and the business, and like being able to calm everybody down and be like, let's get on the same page, let's find compromise. And those skill sets do not, like, when you think about moving it up higher in this ladder in cybersecurity, like, not a ton of people talk about that. They're like, oh, those are actually the things that are going to make you a great leader, as well as being able to manage people and stuff like that. So I don't think it's a requirement these days. I think more and more companies are finding ways to let very technical people keep climbing with parallel tracks, I think. So a couple companies I've heard of lately in the big tech sector, there is like a 7-tier technical only track for engineers, right? And so that has been a thing in development too. I think that's happened a lot with engineers, like coders. And so they're starting to adopt that in cybersecurity. So just, you don't have to graduate to be a manager or a people leader if you don't want to. You can continue to just contribute technically, and we have this ladder for you to climb, and this payout structure and stuff like that. So I think that's less happening nowadays. But when I was coming up, it was like that. I don't know. What about you, Daniel?
So I spent my first 15 plus years in government, and things are a little different in government.
Yeah.
I bet, for better or worse. I ended up getting or pursuing advancement and promotions, let's face it, because of the money. In
Yeah.
government, leadership gets paid more, tends to get paid more than the individual contributors.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I like this. I'm probably going to retire from this place, so I might as well make the best of it.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say about government is they tend to force like leadership training on you. There's not typically a promotion to at least like more senior levels where you have to take some sort of class, etc. I also spent some time in the military, so I went through some of the leadership training there. And I would say that benefits me today, every day, because there is some formal training you can benefit from in leadership. And some people are natural and they just make it up and they do a good job, but there are management theories that actually can be quite effective. And so having gone through those things, I think makes me a better manager. But then I also hit a ceiling where my boss at the time was the CISO. I was an associate CISO for a different like business unit, if you will, government department. And so my only upward motion at the time was going to be to apply for his job. So I was like, yeah, man, you thinking about retiring? What's going on? And he's like, well, probably 3 to 4 years maybe. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I love you as my boss. Unfortunately, I can't wait that long. So I'm going to test the waters elsewhere. And then I went into private industry, which was, I do not regret one bit. However, that was an eye opener after being in government, both federal and state service for so long. There was a lot of interesting changes. Wait a minute, I can just buy this product. I don't have to get 7 competitive bids, hire somebody. I don't have to like have 5 candidates for which I know aren't going to get hired and just lead them on. I always felt bad about that, but these are the things. And so in private industry, that got a lot better, but there's different challenges too.
That is really interesting. When I work with people from the government or who have a government or military background, I love it because they have that leadership training a lot of time. And so they can really, as a functional team, build really great teams and lead groups of people in ways that I'd never seen before. And so I'm very much like a player coach in my leadership style, right? I am with my engineers. I am building and working with them as much as possible. But there is a skill that they must teach you guys that is really special to get people to follow and understand the battle plan and go in. And also, I think that there's an accepted teams kind of vibe that goes on. I think that a lot of times when I see hackers who come out of like the NSA or something like that, or any DoD ethical hacker or someone who's done assessment, they understand that you're not going to succeed all by yourself. They understand that you need to lean on a team and that people have specializations, and that's not a threat to your advancement or things like that. Usually they're willing to work better on, especially in red teaming. I find that like NSA red teamers, just like they understand that it's not a solo game, it's a team game sometimes to be successful. And so I really enjoy that actually. Sometimes you get people who come up through just like the regular security scene and they're lone wolf and they just want to do their own thing, build their own tools, do their own assessments. And that doesn't lend itself to group projects very well.
Yeah, the part of the, especially in the military, the sort of team and buddy system is very high because at any given time, you also might find yourself under fire, get shot at, and then you really have to counter that person, even though you're like doing computer nerd stuff all day. When the bullets start flying, you still have to be able to count on them. So better not make that guy too mad. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for sure.
I just wanted to ask really quickly, Jason, you had mentioned wanting to affect change at a larger level. Is there a particular instance, like a success story of affecting change that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I think that 3.5 years at Ubisoft really felt like 10 years, honestly, because of the structure of the business and the stuff that happened while I was there. So we faced three really relevant threat actors when I was there. It was like trial by fire. And we were forced to build some different structured security programs. It gave me a very interesting purview for how I wanted to build out that security program. And I learned a lot at what worked and didn't. And so I think the two things that I really realized that company was one that I had a whole bunch of table stakes in mind for what goes into a security program, right? You need to, first of all, one of my big soapboxes is attack surface management and understanding the assets that you have. You cannot defend what you don't know you have. It's huge. And I think over the last 5 years, and then people have started to realize that. It's like attack surface management, external, internal, it doesn't matter, has started to become a conversation. People understand they need it. But the one that I learned that is also becoming a huge issue is secrets management as a piece of a program. And so this is the idea that at any given time, your developers, your tech people, even your users are sharing secrets and potentially leaking secrets all over the internet. These are things like passwords or API keys or certificates or you name it, but mostly passwords and API keys are the biggest ones. And these days, attackers who are nation state or hobbyists will not waste time and energy if they don't have to. They're not looking for a technical hack, they're looking for an objective. And so they will go to the dark web first and see if any of your employees have leaked credentials so they can just walk into your organization, which the last 5 years of breaches, you can look at the statistics and something like 85% of all big breaches, maybe even more now, I think maybe 90% of the last CISO study I looked at, is the start of initial access for an adversary is them finding a credential somewhere, whether they buy it, whether a big thing that happened to us during COVID was people had to go home, right? All the businesses sent everybody to do homework and there wasn't enough laptops to take home from the business side. Now, at Ubisoft, we couldn't even order enough. Even if we had the budget, we couldn't order them during COVID. And so basically, you have all of these employees now going home working on their home laptops, which their kids have used to play Minecraft and all this stuff, and they have malware on them already. Or maybe you're human and you downloaded a movie at one point or got a phishing email or something, right? Like these are things that happen to humans, and that's fine. But they were already owned, and so they were already being sold. Access to them was already being sold on the dark web. And so it really caused a lot of credentials to start leaking out there to different places. We had to build a program to understand how we could address that problem. And one is first you stop the bleeding, which is you have to identify where you are leaking secrets and how. And the second part is to prevent it. So anytime someone needs to share a password, needs to code and embed an API key or embed a credential or a certificate or something like that, you need to give them a safe way to do it. And then you need to educate the whole company on why sharing these things through not those methods is horrible. And you need to give them a method to do it safely, which for us at Ubisoft was a vault technology. And so basically that program didn't exist. And when I went out to talk to a lot of like people in the industry, I'm a big person who likes to survey my friends. I'll call other CISOs and be like, hey, what are you doing for this? We have this problem. Every time I called other CISOs, they were like, yeah, we don't have a secrets management program. We don't really deal with that problem that much right now. We're getting hit just like you are. And so that's the program we built, and it was fantastically effective at reducing our risk across the board for a whole bunch of stuff. And there are things that come out of it too, like IAM, like identity and access management, two-factor authentication, configuration, session management. All these things are associated to that project, but really just the credentials, getting a tackle on the credentials for a big business is really important. So that was one. The other is this team that I put together that was a strike team. And what we did at Ubisoft was we surveyed all of the most used technologies and development languages across the business. And we were able to put together a team of, I think, about 6 people, which is a lot for some companies and not that many for other companies. It depends on how big you are. But we were able to put together a team of about 6 engineers who we hired. And they were engineers first. So that means like coding and developing and in these languages, and like DevOps people as well, who were able to do deployment in the frameworks that we used. And then we taught them security. Well, we had a couple security people on the team who taught them security. So it was like 4 and 6, I would say, 4 developers, 2 security people. And then we would basically canvas where we needed the most security help across the business units that were all struggling. So we would track metrics and be like, it just seems like we keep on having problems here. We call it the embed program. We would embed these engineers with them and just give them extra staff. And so I would go to a director of another business unit and say, hey, it seems like we have a lot of security issues that are coming up here. I know that you're under stress to meet deadlines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my embed team for 3 months, and they're just developers, and they're going to come to your stand-ups. They're going to embed in your development cycle, and then they're going to build security features, and they're going to implement them too. And so really, you don't have any responsibility. And when they're not working on security features, they can help with regular development and DevOps tasks. They can basically groom the backlog of issues you have in your Jira and stuff like that. And so me being able to have that helping hand group, the embed team, to help different internal business units was one of the most effective teams that I ever built as well. So secrets management and an embed group, like a strike team for security engineers, were the 2 things that I think I learned at Ubisoft.
That's a fantastic way of doing it. And if you have the resources and at scale,
Yeah.
but I love that. We had something similar where we at the university, we were part of central IT, which was a
Mhm.
whole separate issue, but that's
Yeah.
how we were organized. But all of the departments basically ran their own IT to a degree. Some fully subscribed to the central services, the smaller ones, but some had a full stack with the director of IT and manage their own networks, et cetera. And so we tried to build liaisons. We couldn't quite staff it and like task people to them,
Mhm.
but we would send people there to be with them for a bit and try to train them up and then also build these relationships
Yeah.
that when something bad happens, they know they can reach out to a trusted contact.
Yeah.
And they knew we wouldn't like air their dirty laundry across and the pottery department got wholly owned. Look at
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And I think the other things I learned was just like I subscribe to radical transparency. I think that once we started to shift the security group to that, I think you go into a lot of places, and this has been over many companies. You go into a lot of places and security is the bad cop, right? They come in, they tell you what to do, they drop a whole bunch of vulnerabilities on you, which is development work. They give you that air of maybe we're a little bit superior, and nobody likes that. And so transitioning away from a culture of security is the bad cop and into security is here to help you, and we're just different types of engineers was really important. I think going forward for many companies is going to be really important in the next plus 5-10 years of building a security program. And yeah, I mean, that required also, I think that there's a previous generation of security people who learned how to do security without learning how to do development. And this is a big thing right now. And so now most bigger tech companies, you'll see that security engineers are actually, they do have a background in code so that they can fix as well as find. And it's a really interesting dichotomy in the way the industry grew up and is now having to transition. So that was something that we were trying to change piece by piece. The other successful things, just since we're talking about leadership a lot, was within the first year, I managed to sit down with all my reports, like my managers and directors who were under me, and we just penciled out or whiteboarded out who are the influencers in the organization. And this is not just the bosses. This is people who are the ICs who everybody trusts. And we just started building a schedule and making sure that we were taking them out to lunch, understanding what their problems were, checking in on them, DMing them, and try to keep those relationships open because we knew at some point there's going to be some security task, something that we needed their support on. And you got to build relationships. You can't just, otherwise, people, even without you doing anything bad, will assume that security is the bad cop. And building relationships is really important. So I had 4 directors under me. we split up. We built that influencer list and we split it up between all of us. And we were rotating and just making sure we're keeping those relationships open. And you'll be really surprised how far a pizza and a beer can go. Or saying, hey, you guys want to go out this Thursday, take the teams out to watch the game or whatever it is. Those things can go a long way into building inroads with the business leaders.
Yeah, super smart way to identifying these influences in the business units. Bob, who's been here for 15 years, who everybody generally trusts.
Yeah.
If you come in, it's like, hey, we got to do this. And then Bob says, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do this.
Everyone's on board. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like that idea of radical transparency that you'd mentioned, Jason, but I was just curious, as a CISO, like, how are you able to implement something like that when you can't necessarily reveal your whole hand when talking about like a breach or something along those lines? Like, how do you reconcile that?
That was exactly why I mentioned that. And my ADHD took it a different way. But the reason why I first mentioned it was because, like I said, we face several threat actors. And so I had several opportunities on how to handle internal communications around like a security incident, right? And so I didn't build a structured way on how to say, this type of security incident, we do this, or this type of security incident, we don't do this. But with a lot of the major ones, we learned that including IT and all tech groups on the post analysis calls with the third party vendor that usually brewed. And so when you have a big incident, you usually don't have enough staff to deal with it. So you bring in a consulting group like a Mandiant or a CrowdStrike to help augment your teams, right? And so you keep that money in like a rainy day pocket, and hopefully you never use it, but sometimes you do. And then so the best response we ever had as an organization in the way of, okay, everybody understands that we had a bad thing happen to us and we need to all gather together to fix it, was a post-breach call we had with Microsoft, the Microsoft team that came in to augment us. And we just went radical transparency. Like you were saying that you need to hide some stuff. We didn't hide anything. We did the whole post-breach report with all of the tech people in the company, pretty much. Even some of the game directors who were technical game directors who don't really have anything to do with IT or security. But we wanted everybody to know, here's what happened. We have these other experts that are supporting us as well. Here's how we're working through it. Here's how it happened. And then here's how we plan to respond to it. And I'll be damned if doing it that way didn't make it so much easier. Just being honest with everybody, right? Everybody understands, right? Oh, we made a mistake. We need to fix it now. It requires funding and people to implement those fixes and buy a product or something like that. And it was so much easier after we were radically transparent with the tech leaders versus other times where we had just messaged out via emails, hey, we had a breach. Of course, everybody like knows we had an incident or something like that, right? Because it filters out through the company. But that's all they get is like an email or something saying, hey, we had an issue. Obviously, it caused outages or whatever, but they don't really know. And so when we brought them into the know, it definitely was a better reaction. And as a company, and we're able to change things because the reception was really well. It was really good.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
Yeah, and I would say something similar could even, I found it useful, even the breach is a good example. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it will. And then that's a really big deal. Part of my philosophy is like security should not be the department of no. And so I always like to be very transparent with my reasoning. And sometimes I do have to say no, but then I want to explain it so people can't be like, he just doesn't like anything he's going to ask. Yeah, you want to say no.
Yeah.
And so that way, the few times where it's like the risk is so big, no, sorry guys, we can't do that. Like that is like unacceptable risk.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay, he must really mean it because the other few times we worked something out and it didn't end up exactly where the initial like path led us, but with some minor modification, risk becomes acceptable, we're fine. So
it's so much measured. There's just like a lot of measuring of influence, I think, being a security leader. Like when you can come in and just say, hey, we cannot do this. This is like really dangerous versus, hey, we can find a way together to get to where you want to go just differently. I think that's a huge part of being a security leader is to find those compromises. And it's not always easy because as a leader, you sit between your teams who are security people and the business who want to make the business profit. And you have to be that negotiator. Sometimes my own people were like, no, absolutely, we cannot do that thing. And I'm like the one to be like, hold on, let's see if we can figure out a way to get to the same result, but differently and more securely. And so having that mindset is really important.
I know, you're speaking my language. I go through that on a regular basis. There are some very strong security people who are like, also a little bit more black and white. We're dealing shades of gray, but they're like, no, they can't do that. I'm like, okay, let's look at that again, and
Yeah.
maybe we can.
Yeah.
The other thing I also find in that sort of realm, just anecdotally, you get some junior people in, which I'm a big proponent of. We got to
Mhm.
train them. I might
Yeah.
as well get them young and figure out how we do things rather than having to retrain them because they learned
Yeah.
some bad habits elsewhere. But it is so tempting as a junior security, but SecOps engineer. There's the field. It's got tons of rocks. I'm going to run into that field and kick over all the rocks. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hold on.
Yeah.
Whatever you uncover, you now know how to deal with.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
let's maybe pick some rocks we're going to kick over and not just go crazy because then you know all the things and then you have to do all the things. So
Yeah.
that's hard to teach because everybody's eager. I want to go in there and make it all better and fix it all. And I'm like, yes, but you in what army?
Yeah. And then it's if you kick over the rocks, it's your job to make sure that we fix the pile or whatever allegory you want to use. But yeah, but it's absolutely a thing that like newer practitioners will want to do. They'll want to come in and reinstitute. And so that's the job of the leader too, is to understand program management and prioritization of the security program and be able to reorient people when you know that thing is not gonna serve this year's goals. Or having seen few security programs, that's a hornet's nest of work, right? It's they want to revamp the whole vulnerability management lifecycle, and you're like, that is a big job. That is a year and a half worth of work to revamp that kind of thing. And you think it's like a couple weeks, but it's not. It's so we need to talk about this. And is that a thing that we want to prioritize right now? It might be, sure. A lot of companies it is, but you need to have a strategic mindset and have been exposed to security programs before and know where those hornets nests are. The other thing that I have a buddy who worked at Apple as one of my really good friends, Daniel Miessler, and he runs a podcast and all this stuff, but he's a great security leader. And one of the things I learned from him is that being a security leader is also like being a politician, and building content can help you shape narrative inside of an organization. And so one of the best things that I think that Dan helped me do was build at some of my roles, my leadership roles, is I was actually radically transparent with the security goals for the year. Every year we would re-record a video with production on what the security program was aiming to do that year, what the goals were, who the people were, why we were doing what we were doing in response to what. Because last year we had this issue, so we're working on secrets management this year. And so this is a pre-recorded video that I would send out to all the leaders. And I would be like, okay, here's what we're doing. My name is Jason. If you've never met me before, I'm the highest ranking security person here. I'm here to help keep our business safe. And I would send this out. And so a lot of times what you have is other executives in the realm who like you'll never get to meet with them, especially at a big business, right? They're just too busy doing product or whatever business process or finance or whatever. And so I would send this video out and host it on an internal page as well. And so there was no question at the organization what I was trying to accomplish. That's it. This is it. And you can go review it. You can send it to whoever you want. You have the slides. And then if you want to book a meeting with me to talk about how it impacts you, or if you have ideas that fit into this, let's get on a call. Here's the email. Let's set it up and I'll talk with you guys all day, or one of the directors will talk with you. And so I think that is part of, I think, the radical transparency idea. And yeah, that really helped me to understand that without strong content as well inside of a big organization, it's really hard to affect change. And so I ended up doing a lot of those pre-recorded videos that I sent out to people because I knew they wouldn't have time to come to the technical meeting that we were going to have or the wrap-up meeting that we were going to have or something like that. And along with that was publicly available metrics for the different business units. I wasn't trying to shame anybody, but we started out honestly in a spreadsheet and PowerPoint to build our metrics. And then eventually we got to an actual platform. But every business unit had a backlog of security issues and projects that they needed to execute. And it was different for every business unit. And so we would talk about that on a big meeting with all of the leaders once every quarter. And then we would post those slides and that Excel sheet on that website too, to just show everybody where everybody was and what everybody needs to work on. And you'll be surprised by it. You'd think that this would cause some animosity, but it actually doesn't. What happens is other leaders see other business units struggling and they're like, hey, we dealt with this problem already. Maybe we could help you. At least it was my case. A lot of people warned me that, oh, that would cause derision, but it didn't. It actually helped. The transparency helped bring people together in most cases when I implemented this. Yeah.
I love that, Jason. Can I pivot really quickly? I want to keep an eye on time, but I want to hear more about you founding a company. So I want to learn a little bit more about why you wanted to make that pivot and what you've learned so far. So can you tell us a little bit about Arcanum?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so me going to Ubisoft and being like the big CISO role was an experiment. I didn't tell anybody anything otherwise, right? I even told my own wife, I don't know if this is going to work out, but I want to try my hand at it and see if I can do it. And the answer was yes. But I think at the end of it all, it ended up being a little bit too political for me, a little bit too non-tech for me. And it's a very common thing for tech people, is like moving up and then being like, oh, I don't really like this, and coming back down. When I came out of leadership, I was like, okay, what do I want to do? And I just took a long, hard look at my career and was like, what have I had the most fun doing? And it's always been hacking, always. Like, it's always been offensive security with a little bit of a purple kind of splash of flair, I think. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So first I went to a buddy's company. I'd known him for a long time. I'd done moonlight tests for him, pen tests and stuff like that. And that didn't end up working out. I went there for about a year. But during that process, the field of penetration testing and red teaming had changed significantly. So I had to go into education mode, retrain myself as to what modern red teaming looked like, what modern breaches looked like, what pen testing looked like, and what the difference was between all three of them, to build a program there. And so I learned that there was this blind spot that a lot of, I would say, consultancies out there weren't hitting. They were basically doing the same methodology over and over again at every consultancy. They're very focused on Active Directory, misconfigurations and exploits and things like that on the internals. And then on the externals, it's mostly web hacking. And I already knew how to do most of that. But then what I started to see from real bad guys was like, they're not doing any of that at first, right? They're doing this credential kind of work. They're doing modern phishing. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff. And so I ended up building a methodology there. And then eventually I started training as well in my free time. So I have a class called the Bug Hunters Methodology, which is an offensive security class, which is like my 20 years of experience rolled into 3 days. And then I started doing that at conferences, I think. And so one day when I was talking to my wife, Julia, who's also has been a financial consultant and is our COO here, we were just talking. She's like, if you wanted to do the training full time, you could probably just do full time training. And I was like, I really enjoy that. She's like, you'd have to do it so many times a year, but you could match your current salary doing training. And I was like, okay. So at that point, we decided to pivot and start our own training company. And so we launched with the first offensive security training. It's live. We do it once a quarter, and it's all of my experience from bug bounty, red teaming, pen testing rolled into 3 days. I think it's really good. We've had a lot of really great students come through there from everywhere, some of the biggest companies in the world. So that's take off. And what came from that was people taking the course and being like, hey, I love taking the course and I'm going to apply this in my career, but really we just want you to come do our test this year, like our red team test or our penetration test or our purple team test. And so we started offering consulting services, but we're really small, right? Arcanum is just me, Julia, and a couple contractors, right? Who I have very high standards for contractors. So, and luckily I have a lot of friends from the bug bounty industry who are world-class hackers, but they already have jobs at Netflix and Google. And so they're not open to being employed by any of these companies, but they're open to moonlight. And so they're open to consult. And so I'll use them on projects where I see that they have a skill set that matches. And so then we launched a second training, I think 6 months ago, where again, my buddy Daniel Niesler was very excited about AI. And I thought AI was the next crypto and I wasn't going to get on the hype train. And then he convinced me otherwise. And I saw the massive potential for us to affect change in cybersecurity, specifically through the use of generative AI. And so I have a class that basically talks about how to use the current gen AI tools, which are mostly LLMs, for security people, and how to scale your security people instead of replace them, how to give them superpowers, basically. And so that class is called Red, Blue, Purple AI. And we launched that, I think, 6 months ago. We've taught it 3 times, and it's a fantastic course. People from all over have been taking it. And so now I'm the de facto like AI cybersecurity dude. So that's the origin. The name comes from a famous fantasy book. If either of you are nerds and have read Name of the Wind before by Patrick Rothfuss, it's a tremendous fantasy book, probably one of the best fantasy books of our generation, I think. So the Arcanum in his book is the school of magic. It's called the Arcanum. And so that's where the name comes from for our business. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have not read that, unfortunately, but maybe I will now because I am looking for something to read. Are you a big reader, Jason?
Yeah. Sci-fi, fantasy. I read everything. I'm reading all the time. I'm audiobooking or on my phone, or you can see all the tech books on my shelf behind me. Yeah.
Then you'll absolutely have to come back because we do a book club version of the podcast.
Oh, very cool.
I will have you back for that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of audiobooks. I will die on that hill that listening to one is like reading one. Very busy all the time outside of work, but I can have something in my ear and listen to it, and I love it. So
Yeah.
that's how I consume most of my books these days.
Yep. Me and my wife always are listening to audiobooks, and it's a crazy world we live in. Now some people are going directly to audiobook before even publishing like a print book. It's crazy. I've read quite a few of those now, and they've been fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, I love audiobooks. I think it's great for like people. I feel like everybody on this call might have ADHD.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just a little bit. Yeah. So it's perfect for that. When you want to do something else, you want to listen to the book too. So
Yeah.
that's great. Just to close things out, and I know this question won't work unless you've seen the show, but just working at a video game company, Jason, I'm just curious, have you seen Mythic Quest?
Yes, I have. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
So what would you think an episode would look like talking about like the security focus for Mythic Quest?
I imagine if they were to write a script for Mythic Quest that involved cybersecurity, right, it would probably be from the lens of view of the development team and just lamenting even having to deal with us and be like, who are these assholes who are coming in here telling us to do all these things and change all these things, and it's such a pain in the ass. And it would be like that. That would be like the undertone. And hopefully they would come to some comedic compromise, I think. But yeah, I think that's how they would handle that. Mythic Quest and then the IT Crowd are two of my favorite, like kind of parody, like kind of IT centric shows. But yeah, if you just ask regular people when you talk about their security team at their company, first of all, they don't know really anybody on the security team. And then the first thing is, we hate them by default. So that might be like the way that goes.
That script writes itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think they've touched on that subject yet, but it feels like just talking about not just the ransomware element, but like kids wanting the cloud. I'm just like, oh, that's great for
Yeah.
Mythic Quest would be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, but before we leave, just to get to know a little bit more about you as a person outside of InfoSec and cybersecurity, what would you like people to know about you? What do you like to do for fun?
Like I said, I'm a big gamer, right? So I just did a retweet of some research that talks about like having hobbies outside of your chosen career and building those mental pathways is one of the ways you can fight burnout. So as far as like physical activities, I have 3 kids, so I'm always busy. And that's the best job and my primary job. But for myself, I really like to do paintball and airsoft. Those are 2 of my outdoor activities. Just hanging out with the kids, doing whatever, reading a lot, gaming. That's mostly what I do. And then spending time with my wife too, just watching, binging on some TV show or whatever. We just finished Yellowstone, which I hadn't seen and everybody had been talking about for 5 years. And so we finally caught up on that and got a couple more in the hopper. So just normal life stuff. I'm not a complicated dude.
Very cool. That's like paintball, especially. That sounds really fun. I have never done that myself.
Yeah, paintball is really fun. I'm a big fan of outdoor activities that you don't know you're working out, right? Like you're having fun while you're doing it and the adrenaline replaces any tiredness. And so paintball and airsoft are 2 that do it for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Jason and Daniel. This was a great conversation. I really think our listeners are going to enjoy it. Where can people find you if they have any questions or want to reach out?
Yeah. So I am on X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days, at Haddix. So JHADDIX. You can at me there or DM me. DMs are open. My company is Arcanum Security. The domain is arcanum-sec.com. If you're interested in looking at any of the trainings or seeing what we do. But I'm pretty active on X, and then I speak at a lot of conferences. So stop me in the hallway somewhere if you see me. I'm always releasing research and tools and stuff like that and talking about these issues. So if you see me, track me down and we'll have a drink and a conversation.
That sounds great. Thank you again for being here. And again, thanks, Daniel, for riding shotgun. Always fun to talk to you too. And thank you to our Breaking Badness listeners. We hope you'll join us again for another all-new episode of Breaking Badness. Thanks, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter at Domain Tools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.